At 58, Julia Roberts is still one of the most beloved actresses in the world. For millions of people, her name instantly brings back memories of a dazzling smile, a warm laugh, and unforgettable movies that shaped an entire generation. She was the woman who made audiences believe in romance again. She was the star who could light up a screen without even saying a word. To the public, Julia Roberts seemed to have everything: beauty, fame, success, love, fortune, and the kind of Hollywood legacy most actors spend their entire lives chasing. But behind that famous smile, there was always another story. The tragedy of Julia Roberts is not the kind of tragedy that appears in one sudden, shocking headline. It is not a simple story of failure, scandal, or collapse. Her tragedy is quieter, deeper, and far more human. It is the story of a woman who became America's sweetheart while privately carrying pain, loss, pressure, and the heavy cost of being turned into an image the world refused to let go of. Julia Fiona Roberts was born on October 28, 1967, in Smyrna, Georgia. Long before the red carpets, the awards, and the flashing cameras, she was just a little girl growing up in a family that understood both art and struggle. Her parents, Walter and Betty Lou Roberts, were involved in acting and theater, but their family life was far from the perfect Hollywood dream people might imagine. Julia's childhood was shaped by divorce, emotional tension, and uncertainty. When Julia was still young, her parents separated. For any child, watching a family break apart can leave wounds that never fully disappear. It creates questions, fears, and a quiet kind of sadness that follows you into adulthood. For Julia, that pain became part of the foundation of who she was. The world would later know her for joy, laughter, and charm, but those qualities did not come from an easy life. Sometimes the brightest smiles are born from the darkest rooms. Then came a loss that changed everything. Julia's father died of cancer when she was only 10 years old. At an age when a child still needs protection, guidance, and comfort, Julia had to face grief. Losing a parent so young can make the world feel unsafe. It can make happiness feel temporary. It can teach a child that even the people you love most can be taken away. No amount of fame, money, or applause could ever erase that kind of pain. And yet, Julia kept going. As she grew older, acting became more than a dream. It became an escape, a language, and a way to transform pain into something meaningful. She eventually followed the path of performance, stepping into a world where rejection was constant and judgment was brutal. Hollywood is never gentle, especially to young women. It demands beauty, confidence, perfection, and obedience, all while pretending that fame is a gift. Julia Roberts had something different. She had a natural presence that could not be taught. She was beautiful, yes, but she was also unpredictable, emotional, funny, vulnerable, and real. The camera loved her because audiences believed her. She did not look like someone pretending to feel. She looked like someone who felt everything. Then in 1990, everything changed. Pretty Woman turned Julia Roberts into a global superstar. Almost overnight, she became one of the most famous women on earth. Her chemistry with Richard Gere, her unforgettable laugh, and her magnetic screen presence made the film a cultural phenomenon. People were obsessed with her. Studios wanted her. Magazines chased her. Fans adored her. But sudden fame is not always a blessing. Sometimes it is a storm wearing the mask of a dream. From that moment on, Julia Roberts no longer fully belonged to herself. Her face was everywhere. Her relationships became public entertainment. Her body, her clothes, her smile, her choices, and even her private emotions were discussed by strangers. The same world that praised her also began to consume her. That is one of the cruelest parts of becoming a star. People love the image, but they often forget the person trapped inside it. Throughout the 1990s, Julia became one of Hollywood's biggest names. She starred in hit after hit and proved that she was more than just a romantic comedy queen. But success came with pressure. Every role had to matter. Every appearance had to sparkle. Every interview had to remind people why they loved her. And when a woman is placed on a pedestal, the world waits for her to fall. Her personal life was followed with intense attention. Every romance, every breakup, every rumor became part of the public conversation. Love, something that should have been private and safe, became another performance under the lights. For someone who had already known loss and instability early in life, that kind of exposure could not have been easy. Still, Julia Roberts survived the storm. She went on to win an Academy Award for Erin Brockovich, proving to anyone who doubted her that she was not just a movie star. She was a powerful actress. It was a moment of triumph. But even triumph has its shadows. Because awards cannot bring back a lost father. Fame cannot heal childhood wounds. Money cannot buy peace. And being loved by millions does not mean you are truly understood. At 58, Julia Roberts' tragedy is not that she lost everything. In fact, she built a life and career many people admire. The real tragedy is that the world has often reduced her to a smile, a symbol, a fantasy, and a memory from classic films, while forgetting that behind the legend is a woman who had to carry grief, pressure, and public judgment for decades. Julia Roberts gave the world joy. But the heartbreaking truth is that joy often came from a woman who had already learned what pain feels like. But the story of Julia Roberts does not end with fame, awards, and the glittering illusion of Hollywood perfection. In many ways, that was only the beginning of the real battle. Because once Julia became one of the most famous women in the world, every part of her life was placed under a microscope. And for someone who had already lived through childhood loss, family tension, and emotional uncertainty, fame did not simply give her power. It also took something away. It took her privacy. For most people, heartbreak happens behind closed doors. Relationships begin, relationships end, mistakes are made, tears are cried, and life moves on quietly. But for Julia Roberts, nothing was ever completely private. When she loved someone, the world wanted details. When a relationship ended, the world wanted blame. When rumors appeared, the world wanted drama. Her pain was not treated like pain. It was treated like entertainment. And that is a lonely way to live. Throughout her career, Julia Roberts was often portrayed as confident, radiant, and untouchable. She looked like the kind of woman who could walk into any room and own it. But the truth is, even the most powerful stars can feel powerless when the public believes it owns their story. Hollywood fame can create a strange prison, beautiful on the outside, but suffocating on the inside. Julia's romantic life became a constant subject of fascination. The media followed her relationships closely, turning private emotions into public headlines. People speculated about who she loved, why things ended, and what kind of woman she really was. The more famous she became, the less room she had to simply be human. A normal heartbreak became a national conversation. A personal decision became a scandal. A private chapter became gossip for strangers. That pressure can quietly change a person. When the world watches your every move, you learn to protect yourself. You smile when you are exhausted. You stay calm when people misunderstand you. You keep walking when cameras are waiting for you to break. And sometimes, the strongest thing a celebrity can do is not explain themselves at all. Julia Roberts learned that lesson over time. She did not always give the public everything it wanted. She did not build her life around constant visibility. Instead, as the years passed, she began to pull back from the endless Hollywood machine. She chose fewer roles. She became more selective. She protected her family life. And to some fans, that seemed surprising. They wondered where Julia Roberts had gone, as if a woman who had given decades to the screen owed the world permanent access to her life. But perhaps Julia understood something that fame rarely teaches. Peace is more valuable than attention. After years of being one of the most photographed women on earth, Julia Roberts began choosing a different kind of success. Not just box office numbers, not just awards, not just magazine covers. She chose stability. She chose motherhood. She chose a life that did not always need to be performed for an audience. Still, that choice came with its own sadness. Because Hollywood has a way of punishing women for aging, changing, and stepping outside the fantasy people created around them. When Julia was young, she was celebrated for her beauty and charm. But as she grew older, the conversation around her changed, as it does for so many actresses. People began comparing her to her younger self, analyzing her appearance, and asking whether she still had the same star power. But no one stays frozen in time. The tragedy is not that Julia Roberts aged. Aging is natural. Aging is a privilege. The tragedy is that the entertainment industry often treats a woman's aging as a loss, instead of a life fully lived. For decades, Julia gave audiences unforgettable performances, yet some people still looked at her through the narrow lens of youth and beauty. That is heartbreaking because Julia Roberts was never just a face. She was Vivian Ward in Pretty Woman, giving vulnerability to a character who could have easily been dismissed. She was Julian Potter in My Best Friend's Wedding, brave enough to play a woman who was messy, jealous, and imperfect. She was Anna Scott in Notting Hill, showing the loneliness behind celebrity. She was Erin Brockovich, fierce, raw, and unforgettable. Through these roles, Julia did more than entertain. She revealed pieces of what it means to be human. And maybe that is why audiences loved her so deeply. They saw themselves in her. They saw the woman who laughs to hide pain. The woman who wants love but fears being hurt. The woman who looks strong because she has no other choice. The woman who can light up a room while silently carrying things no one else can see. But fame rarely allows that complexity. It simplifies people. It turns them into headlines. It turns a living person into a brand. For Julia Roberts, that brand was happiness, warmth, romance, the perfect smile, the perfect leading lady, the woman everyone wanted to believe had a perfect life. But perfection is one of the cruelest myths in Hollywood. Behind the scenes, Julia had to navigate the same realities that many people face: grief, family wounds, difficult choices, marriage, motherhood, aging, and the fear of losing herself in a world that constantly demanded more. The difference is that she had to do it while the public watched, judged, and often misunderstood. And yet, she endured. That endurance is part of what makes her story so powerful. Julia Roberts did not simply survive Hollywood by becoming louder or more desperate for attention. She survived by learning when to step forward and when to step away. She protected the parts of her life that mattered most. She proved that a woman could be a legend without surrendering everything to fame. But there is still something deeply sad about what it took to get there. Because Julia Roberts had to learn early that love can be lost. She had to learn that fame can be dangerous. She had to learn that public adoration does not always protect private happiness. And she had to learn that even when the whole world knows your name, very few people truly know your heart. At 58, Julia Roberts stands as more than a Hollywood icon. She stands as a reminder that even the brightest stars can carry invisible pain. Her tragedy is not a collapse. It is the quiet cost of a lifetime lived between admiration and invasion, between joy and grief, between the woman the world wanted and the woman she fought to remain. For Julia Roberts, stepping away from the center of Hollywood was not a sign of weakness. It was survival. After years of being chased by cameras, judged by strangers, and turned into a symbol of perfect happiness, she seemed to understand something many stars learned too late. Fame can give you the world, but can also take away your ability to live peacefully inside it. And that is why her later choices became so important. Julia Roberts did not disappear because she had nothing left to offer. She stepped back because she had already given more than most people could imagine. She had given her youth to the industry. She had given her smile to millions of strangers. She had given her private emotions to public interpretation. And after decades of being watched, she began to protect the one thing Hollywood could never truly give her back, a normal life. But choosing normal life is not easy when the world refuses to let you be normal. Every time Julia appeared in public, people studied her face. Every interview became a reminder that audiences still wanted access to the woman they remembered from Pretty Woman, Notting Hill, My Best Friend's Wedding, and Erin Brockovich. They wanted the same laugh, the same glow, the same effortless charm. But time changes everyone. Life changes everyone. Pain changes everyone. Julia Roberts was no exception. She had become a wife, a mother, and a woman with responsibilities far beyond movie sets. The fantasy version of Julia Roberts belonged to the public, but the real Julia had a family to protect, children to raise, and a private world she did not want turned into another Hollywood story. That choice may sound simple, but for a celebrity of her level, privacy is not something you are given. It is something you must fight for every single day. And Julia fought for it quietly. She did not need to explain every absence. She did not need to chase every trend. She did not need to prove she was still relevant by appearing everywhere. Instead, she made fewer but more deliberate choices. She reminded people that a career does not have to be a constant performance. Sometimes power is found in saying no. Still, there's a sadness in that too. Because when a woman in Hollywood chooses peace over visibility, the world often mistakes it for decline. People ask what happened to her, as if choosing family, health, and personal boundaries is some kind of failure. They ask why she's not everywhere anymore, as if a woman has no value unless she is constantly entertaining others. That is part of the tragedy Julia Roberts represents. She became famous in an era when the media could be brutal. Tabloids were ruthless. Paparazzi culture was aggressive. Female stars were built up, torn down, compared, mocked, and endlessly analyzed. Julia lived through all of that while trying to remain graceful, funny, and composed. The public saw the glamour, but it rarely saw the exhaustion. Imagine being expected to smile while strangers debate your marriage. Imagine being expected to look perfect while photographers wait for an unflattering angle. Imagine being expected to remain charming while people who do not know you write stories about your life. That kind of pressure does not always leave visible scars, but leaves scars. And perhaps that is why Julia's performances often carried something deeper than simple movie star charm. Even when she played romantic, funny, or glamorous roles, there is often a flicker of sadness behind her eyes, a sense that the character knew more pain than she was saying. That emotional depth made her unforgettable. Audiences trusted her because she felt real. She was not just beautiful, she was believable. In Erin Brockovich, that truth exploded on screen. Julia played a woman who was underestimated, judged, dismissed, and forced to fight harder than everyone around her. The role won her the Academy Award, but it also revealed something important about Julia herself. She was at her best when playing women who refused to be reduced by other people's opinions. Maybe because she understood that feeling. For years, people tried to define Julia Roberts. They called her America's sweetheart. They called her a romantic comedy queen. They called her difficult, charming, mysterious, powerful, aging, private, iconic. But none of those labels could fully contain her. Labels are easy. People are complicated. And Julia Roberts has always been more complicated than the image made her seem. Her life also reminds us of a painful truth about celebrity culture. The public often feels entitled to the most intimate parts of a person's existence. We want to know who they love, where they live, how they age, what they regret, what they fear, and why they changed. But we rarely ask what that curiosity cost them. For Julia, the cost was years of pressure. Years of being watched. Years of being expected to remain the same woman audiences first fell in love with. But no one can stay the same forever, and no one should have to. At 58, Julia Roberts is not the young woman from the movie posters anymore. She is something far more meaningful. She is a survivor of an industry that often devours its brightest stars. She is a woman who learned how to step away without losing herself. She is proof that a life can be successful even when it is no longer lived for public approval. And yet, the heartbreak remains. Because for all the love the world has given Julia Roberts, much of that love was attached to an image. People loved the smile, the beauty, the romance, the fantasy. But the real woman behind it all had to endure grief, family wounds, media pressure, impossible expectations, and the quiet loneliness of being famous in a world that confuses attention with affection. That is why her story feels so emotional. Julia Roberts did not just become a star. She became a mirror. Through her, audiences saw joy, heartbreak, courage, imperfection, and survival. Her tragedy is not that she lost her light. Her tragedy is that so many people only noticed the light without ever wondering how much darkness she had to pass through to keep it shining. As Julia Roberts moved further into the later chapters of her life and career, the question around her began to change. People were no longer asking only what movie she would do next. They were asking where she had been, why she seemed more private, and why one of the most famous women in Hollywood no longer appeared to chase the spotlight the way she once did. But perhaps the better question was never, what happened to Julia Roberts? Perhaps the better question was, what did Hollywood take from her before she finally chose herself? For decades, Julia Roberts lived inside an industry that rewards beauty but fears aging, celebrates women but often controls them, and praises vulnerability on screen while punishing it in real life. She had spent years giving audiences pieces of herself through unforgettable characters. She made people laugh, cry, hope, and believe in second chances. Yet outside the movies, she had to guard her own heart from a world that constantly wanted more. And eventually, she seemed to understand that the spotlight is not the same thing as love. The public can adore you without protecting you. The media can praise you one day and criticize you the next. Hollywood can call you irreplaceable, then quietly search for someone younger. Fame can surround you with attention while leaving you emotionally alone. Julia Roberts had seen enough of that world to know its beauty and its danger. That may be why she became so careful with her private life. To many fans, Julia's marriage and family life represented a kind of peace she had searched for after years of public attention. But peace is fragile when you are famous. A normal family moment can become a photograph. A private walk can become a headline. A quiet absence can become a rumor. For most people, silence is simply silence. For a celebrity, silence becomes something others try to explain. And that is one of the most painful parts of being a star. You're not allowed to just live. Every choice becomes a story. If Julia appeared at an event, people analyzed her face, her body, her clothes, her mood. If she stayed home, they wondered whether something was wrong. If she smiled, they wanted to know if she was truly happy. If she looked serious, they asked if she was struggling. The world had fallen in love with her image so deeply that it often forgot she was a real person with ordinary human limits. But Julia Roberts was not built to be anyone's possession. That famous smile, the one that became part of Hollywood history, was never a contract promising the world endless happiness. It was not proof that she never suffered. It was not proof that her life was easy. It was simply one part of a much larger woman, a woman who had survived loss, pressure, criticism, and the kind of fame that can quietly swallow a person whole. And still, she kept choosing dignity. Julia did not turn her pain into a constant public performance. She did not build her later life around exposing every private wound. Instead, she allowed mystery to remain. In an age when celebrities are often expected to share everything, that kind of restraint can seem almost rebellious. She understood that not every truth belongs to the public. Not every chapter needs an audience. Not every scar needs to be displayed for sympathy. That choice made her different. It also made her stronger. But strength does not mean the absence of sadness. Sometimes strength is simply the decision to keep walking while carrying things no one else can see. For Julia, those invisible burdens began early. The death of her father, the breakdown of family stability, the pressure of fame, the weight of public judgment, and the constant expectation that she remained the woman people remembered from decades ago. There is something heartbreaking about being trapped inside your own most beloved image. For Julia Roberts, that image was joy. She became the face of romantic optimism. She represented magic, laughter, and the possibility that life could still surprise you. But when the world decides you are a symbol of happiness, it can become difficult to admit when you're tired, wounded, or afraid. People want the fantasy. They do not always know what to do with the truth. And yet, the truth is what makes Julia's story powerful. She was never perfect. She was never untouched by pain. She was never just the woman in the red dress, the movie star on the magazine cover, or the actress holding an Oscar. She was a daughter who lost her father, a young woman thrown into overwhelming fame, a partner whose relationships were judged publicly, a mother trying to protect her children, an actress navigating an industry that often asks women to stay young forever. That is not a simple life. That is a life of survival. And survival rarely looks dramatic from the outside. Sometimes it looks like taking fewer roles. Sometimes it looks like leaving Hollywood parties early. Sometimes it looks like choosing home over headlines. Sometimes it looks like refusing to explain yourself to people who have already decided who you are. Julia Roberts' tragedy is not that she vanished. It is that when she chose peace, people treated it like disappearance. When she chose privacy, people treated it like mystery. When she chose to age naturally, people treated it like a headline. And when she chose to live as a woman rather than a fantasy, some people did not know how to accept it. But that may also be her triumph. Because after everything Hollywood demanded from her, Julia Roberts still belongs to herself. She built a career powerful enough to define an era, but she did not let that era define the rest of her life. She gave the world unforgettable performances, but she kept parts of her soul away from the cameras. She allowed audiences to love her, but she did not allow that love to consume every private corner of her existence. At 58, Julia Roberts is no longer just America's sweetheart. She is a reminder of what fame costs, what privacy is worth, and how quietly heartbreaking it can be to be loved by millions who only know a version of you. Her life proves that even the brightest smile can hide grief. Even the most glamorous career can carry loneliness. And even the most beloved star can spend a lifetime fighting for the simple right to be human. That is the deeper tragedy of Julia Roberts. Not that she lost her light, but that she had to protect it from a world that kept trying to own it. There is a strange kind of sadness that follows stars like Julia Roberts. It is not the sadness of being forgotten. It is the sadness of being remembered too strongly for one version of yourself. The world does not simply remember Julia Roberts as an actress. It remembers her as a feeling, a moment, a golden age of Hollywood romance, a smile that seemed to promise that life, no matter how painful, could still turn beautiful in the end. But what happens when the person behind that feeling grows tired? What happens when the woman behind the smile wants silence more than applause? That is where Julia Roberts' story becomes even more heartbreaking. For many years, audiences wanted her to remain exactly as they first discovered her. Young, glowing, playful, romantic, and endlessly available. They wanted the Julia from Pretty Woman, the Julia from Notting Hill, the Julia from Runaway Bride, the Julia from My Best Friend's Wedding. They wanted the woman who made love stories feel magical and heartbreak feel survivable. But Julia Roberts was never a character frozen on a screen. She was a real woman moving through time. And time changes everything. As Julia grew older, she seemed to become more selective, more private, and more protective of the life she had built away from Hollywood's noise. Some people saw that as distance. Others saw it as mystery. But perhaps it was simply wisdom. After decades in a business that can mistake constant visibility for relevance, Julia learned that being everywhere is not the same as being fulfilled. That choice may sound peaceful, but it came after years of pressure. The pressure to stay beautiful. The pressure to stay likable. The pressure to stay successful. The pressure to stay young in an industry that often treats aging women like disappearing magic. For male stars, aging is often framed as depth, power, experience, and maturity. But for women, aging is too often treated like a problem to solve or a secret to hide. Julia Roberts lived under that double standard for decades. Every line on her face, every public appearance, every change in her style or body could become a discussion. The woman who once represented effortless beauty was expected to somehow defeat time itself. But no one defeats time, and no one should have to. The heartbreaking part is not that Julia Roberts aged. The heartbreaking part is that so many people acted as if aging changed her value. As if the woman who gave the world unforgettable performances had to keep proving that she was still worthy of attention. As if her beauty, talent, and humanity depended on staying permanently young. That is the quiet cruelty of fame. It does not always destroy people with scandal. Sometimes it slowly teaches them that they are only loved when they remain useful to the fantasy. But Julia Roberts refused to live only as a fantasy. She began to show the world another kind of power, the power of absence, the power of privacy, the power of choosing family dinners over flashing cameras, calm over chaos, and self-respect over constant exposure. She did not need to compete with younger actresses or chase every role designed to remind people she was still a star. She already was one. And that confidence came with maturity. Yet even maturity has a cost. Because when a celebrity becomes private, the public often fills the silence with speculation. If Julia was not on every red carpet, people wondered why. If she took fewer roles, people questioned her career. If she protected her family, people called her secretive. It was almost as if the world could not accept that a woman might step away not because she was broken, but because she was whole enough to choose peace. That is one of the most misunderstood parts of Julia's life. Her retreat from constant visibility was not a collapse. It was not defeat. It was not the end of her relevance. It was a boundary. And boundaries are hard to maintain when millions of strangers believe they have a right to your story. Julia Roberts had already given the world so much. She had given it laughter, romance, vulnerability, strength, and some of the most iconic performances of modern cinema. She had carried movies, defined genres, and helped create moments that people still return to when they want comfort. But after all of that, she still had to fight for privacy like anyone else fighting for survival. That is what makes her story so human. Underneath the fame, Julia Roberts faced the same emotional truths many people face. She knew what it meant to lose someone. She knew what it meant to grow up with family pain. She knew what it meant to be judged. She knew what it meant to change and have others resist that change. She knew what it meant to smile when life was not simple. And maybe that is why her smile mattered so much. It was never just beautiful. It was resilient. It carried something audiences could feel even if they could not name it. When Julia smiled on screen, it did not feel empty. It felt like someone choosing light despite knowing darkness. It felt like joy with history behind it. That is why people connected with her so deeply. She did not seem untouched by pain. She seemed like someone who had found a way to rise above it. But rising above pain does not mean pain disappears. At 58, Julia Roberts stands at a place few stars ever reach. She is still admired, still respected, and still remembered as one of the great screen icons of her generation. But she also represents something more complicated now. She represents the emotional cost of being loved by people who only know fragments of you. She represents the burden of being turned into a symbol. She represents the quiet grief of outgrowing an image that the world keeps trying to preserve. And perhaps that is the deepest heartbreak. Julia Roberts gave people a dream. But while audiences held on to that dream, Julia had to live the real life behind it, with its losses, its pressures, its disappointments, its responsibilities, and its private battles. She had to carry the weight of being America's sweetheart while also being a daughter, a mother, a wife, an artist, and a woman who deserved to exist beyond public expectation. The tragedy of Julia Roberts is not that her story ended sadly. It is that so much of her happiness had to be protected from the very world that claimed to love her. And yet, even after everything Julia Roberts has endured, what makes her story so powerful is not only the pain. It is the way she continued to stand. She did not allow Hollywood to define every corner of her identity. She did not allow fame to swallow her completely. She did not let the world's expectations erase the woman she had fought so hard to become. But survival does not mean the journey was easy. For Julia, the road from young actress to global icon came with emotional sacrifices most people will never fully understand. When audiences watch her on screen, they saw glamour, confidence, and charm. They saw the woman who could turn a simple scene into something unforgettable. They saw the star who made romance feel alive and made strength look effortless. But effortlessness is often an illusion. Behind every performance was pressure. Behind every red carpet was scrutiny. Behind every headline was a real person who had to wake up the next morning and keep living with the noise. The world praised Julia Roberts for being natural, but then it placed unnatural expectations on her life. It wanted her to be relatable, but not too ordinary. Beautiful, but not aging. Private, but not distant. Successful, but still available. That contradiction can break people. Julia Roberts had to learn how to exist inside it. She had to learn that not every rumor deserved a response. Not every opinion deserved her energy. Not every camera deserved her smile. And not every part of her life needed to be turned into content for public consumption. That lesson may sound simple, but for someone living under celebrity culture's constant gaze, it is a form of emotional self-defense. Still, the loneliness of that position cannot be ignored. Because when you're famous at Julia's level, trust becomes complicated. People approach you with admiration, but sometimes also with expectation. They want access. They want a story. They want proximity to the legend. And after years of living that way, even kindness can become something you question. Is someone seeing the real person, or are they seeing the name? That is a painful question, and it is one many icons quietly carry. For Julia Roberts, the public image was always bright. She was sold to the world as warmth, romance, wit, and joy. But no image can contain a full life. No movie poster can explain childhood grief. No award speech can reveal every private fear. No famous smile can tell the whole truth of a woman's heart. That is why her life feels so much deeper than the fairy tale people often attach to her. She came from pain and built beauty. She came from loss and created joy. She came from instability and searched for peace. But the world often only noticed the result, not the cost. As the years passed, Julia's relationship with fame seemed to become more careful. She continued to work, but not with the desperation of someone trying to prove she still mattered. She already knew what she had accomplished. She had been the face of a generation. She had led films that became cultural landmarks. She had reached the highest levels of recognition in her craft. But perhaps she also understood that legacy is not only what people remember about your career. Legacy is also what you protect in your life. For Julia, that meant protecting her family, her privacy, her peace, and her right to be more than a Hollywood memory. It meant stepping away from the idea that a woman must remain visible to remain valuable. It meant refusing to let an industry built on image decide the entire meaning of her life. That refusal is powerful, but is also bittersweet. Because when someone like Julia Roberts chooses a quieter life, it reveals how loud her earlier life must have been. It shows how much noise she had survived. It shows that what looked glamorous from the outside may have felt exhausting from within. And it reminds us that sometimes the most beautiful lives in public come with the heaviest private burdens. The tragedy is not that Julia became famous. The tragedy is that fame made so many people forget she was human. They saw the actress, but not always the daughter who lost her father. They saw the star, but not always the young woman trying to understand love under public judgment. They saw the icon, but not always the mother protecting her children from the machine that had consumed so much of her own life. They saw the smile, but not always the strength it took to keep smiling. And maybe that is why Julia Roberts' story still touches people. Because beneath all the fame, it speaks to something universal. Many people know what it feels like to be misunderstood. Many people know what it feels like to carry pain while appearing fine. Many people know what it feels like to outgrow an old version of themselves while others keep demanding that they remain the same. Julia's life became extraordinary, but the emotions underneath it were deeply human. At 58, she is not simply a survivor of Hollywood. She is a survivor of expectation. She survived the expectation to be perfect, the expectation to remain young, the expectation to explain herself, the expectation to give the public endless access, the expectation to be forever grateful for fame, even when that fame took away pieces of ordinary life. And through it all, she kept something sacred. Herself. That may be the most moving part of her story. Julia Roberts did not lose herself completely to the cameras, the headlines, or the applause. She found a way to step back, breathe, and choose the life that mattered to her. She found a way to let the world love her without letting the world own her. But the heartbreak remains because it should never have required so much strength. A woman should not have to fight so hard for privacy. An actress should not have to prove her worth beyond youth. A mother should not have to protect her children from the consequences of her own fame. A human being should not have to hide pain behind a perfect public image just to survive admiration. And yet Julia Roberts did. That is why her tragedy is beyond heartbreaking. Not because she failed, not because she vanished, but because behind one of the most famous smiles in the world was a woman who had to spend decades protecting her peace from the very spotlight that made her unforgettable. But when we look at Julia Roberts at 58, we are not simply looking at a movie star growing older. We are looking at a woman who has lived several lives inside one lifetime. The young girl from Georgia, the grieving daughter, the ambitious actress trying to find her place, the sudden superstar, the romantic icon, the Oscar winner, the wife, the mother, the private woman who learned that peace can be more precious than applause. Each version of Julia carried something forward, and each version had to leave something behind. That is one of the quietest heartbreaks of life. To grow, we must lose parts of ourselves. Julia Roberts became famous so young that the world watched her transformation in public. Audiences felt like they knew her because they had grown up with her films. But watching someone on screen is not the same as knowing what they survived off screen. The world knew her roles. It did not know every sleepless night. It did not know every private fear. It did not know every moment when she had to choose silence instead of defending herself. That silence became one of her strongest forms of survival. In Hollywood, silence can be misunderstood. People expect celebrities to explain everything, deny everything, confess everything, and turn every private experience into a public statement. But Julia Roberts often chose not to live that way. She understood that explanation does not always bring peace. Sometimes it only feeds the machine. And the machine was always hungry. Hollywood did not simply celebrate Julia Roberts. It consumed her image. Her smile became a brand. Her romantic roles became part of pop culture history. Her face became shorthand for charm, beauty, and cinematic magic. But when a human being becomes a brand, something fragile can be lost. The public begins to feel ownership. They think they know what you should look like, how you should behave, who you should love, and how long you should remain the same. But Julia Roberts was never meant to stay the same. No one is. The heartbreaking truth is that many stars spend their lives trying to outrun the version of themselves that made them famous. For Julia, that version was radiant, young, irresistible, and full of possibility. It was the Julia the world first fell in love with. But the real Julia had to keep living after the credits rolled. She had to face marriage, motherhood, aging, grief, responsibility, and the ordinary challenges that fame cannot erase. And perhaps that is what makes her story so moving. She had extraordinary success, but ordinary human wounds. She had global recognition, but private emotional battles. She had millions of admirers, but still had to protect her own heart. That is the part of celebrity that people rarely understand. Fame can make someone visible, but visibility is not the same as intimacy. The public may know your face, your voice, your films, and your most famous moments, but they may never know your loneliness. They may never know the emotional cost of being watched for decades. Julia Roberts lived with that cost. And yet, she never allowed bitterness to become her defining story. That is important, because her tragedy is not a story of defeat. It is a story of endurance. She did not let the pressures of Hollywood erase her warmth. She did not let public judgment turn her into someone desperate for approval. She did not surrender every private piece of herself just to remain in the conversation. Instead, she chose something quieter. She chose control over her own life. To some, that may look like stepping away. But to others, it looks like finally coming home to herself. After years of being part of the public's imagination, Julia Roberts seemed to realize that the most meaningful parts of life are often the ones no camera ever captures. A quiet home, a protected family, a private laugh, a peaceful morning, a moment where no one is asking for anything. Those things may seem small, but for someone who has lived under the spotlight, they can mean everything. Still, the world struggles to accept quiet happiness from famous women. It wants proof. It wants pictures. It wants confession. It wants drama. If a star is not constantly visible, people assume something must be wrong. But sometimes the absence of noise is not tragedy. Sometimes it is healing. And Julia Roberts has earned that healing. She earned it through decades of work, through constant scrutiny, through the loss and uncertainty of her early life, through the weight of being idolized, through the pressure to remain young, beautiful, charming, and endlessly available. She earned the right to choose a life that does not have to be explained to strangers. But there is still something deeply emotional about the fact that she had to earn it all. Because privacy should not be a luxury. Peace should not be something a woman has to defend. Aging should not be treated like a fall from grace. And a person should not have to hide behind a famous smile just to survive the world's expectations. At 58, Julia Roberts' story reminds us that behind every beloved icon is a private human being. One who gets tired, one who grieves, one who changes, one who wants love without performance and peace without permission. Her life is not heartbreaking because she failed to live up to the fantasy. It is heartbreaking because she was forced to carry that fantasy for so long. The world loved Julia Roberts because she made people feel hopeful. But the woman behind that hope had to fight battles most people never saw. She had to learn that applause fades, headlines pass, beauty changes, and fame can be both a gift and a burden. She had to learn that being adored is not the same as being understood. And she had to learn that sometimes the bravest thing a star can do is step away from the spotlight and protect the person behind the legend. That is why, at 58, Julia Roberts remains more than a Hollywood star. She is a reminder that even the brightest lives can carry hidden sorrow. Even the most famous smile can come from a heart that has known loss. And even when the world thinks it knows everything about someone, the deepest truth may still be hidden quietly behind their eyes.